The first thing I remember about that year is the feeling of exhaustion that never left my body. I lived in a haze of scrubs and disinfectant, counting hours by shift rotations instead of days. My family was planning a trip, a big one, the kind that gets talked about for months in advance. It was never really a question of whether I would go, it was always about whether I could pay for it. When my mother announced the flight prices, it sounded almost like a warning. If I couldn't afford it, I was free to stay behind. She made it sound fair, like an adult agreement. But the truth was, the choice was always a test, and the right answer was always for me to find a way to contribute, no matter what it cost me. They didn't know about the shifts I pulled back to back, the way my body ached as I dragged myself home in the mornings, shoes stained from work I never talked about. They didn't ask. They assumed because I worked in healthcare and didn't have children, I was the one with room to spare. I was the backup plan for everyone else. I loaned money to my sister when her husband lost his job, paid medical bills my father couldn't, all while watching my own debt grow. It became normal, expected. Family helps each other, they said, but it was a one-way street. When the charges appeared on my card, it wasn't the first time. I froze, staring at my phone. Business class tickets, not just one, but for everyone but me. No warning, no request, just the assumption I would pay, like always. I'd locked my account and disputed the charges, feeling something in me go cold. When my sister realized nothing was paid for at the airport, she messaged me, confused. I didn't answer right away. I just let her sit with the question. I booked myself a short trip somewhere far away from them, not for relaxation, but just to reclaim space that had been taken from me for so long. My father came to my apartment the next day, expecting me to open the door. I didn't. I sat quietly as he knocked. The power I felt in that moment was new to me. It was the first time I chose not to be available, not to be the solution. I heard him leave, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. That incident wasn't isolated. It was the latest in a series of small betrayals that, over the years, had become routine. The dress my sister bought with my card and never paid back. The loan I co-signed for my parents, thinking it would help the family. Instead, it became another excuse for someone else's irresponsibility. I was the one they counted on, the one who didn't argue. When I was sick, no one checked on me. When my car was damaged by someone else, I paid the price, literally. It became easier to swallow the resentment than to express it. Every time I was asked for more, I rationalized it. I told myself I was helping, but the reality was they were draining me slowly and I was letting them. The week before the family trip was the breaking point. My sister messaged me, asking if I could move up my payday to cover hotel bookings. There was no shame, no hesitation in her request. When I pressed for details, my mother jumped in, chirping that everything was already handled, they just needed a little extra so they could fly business class. It was never about necessity, it was about comfort, the comfort I never got to experience. The trip I wasn't even attending, but I was expected to pay for the upgrade. When I finally pushed back, they made it clear, if I couldn't afford the flights, maybe I shouldn't come. I spent that night at my desk, staring at my bank balance and realizing how long it had been since anyone asked if I was okay, since anyone offered to help. My life had become a spreadsheet of transactions for other people's happiness, with barely enough left over for myself. My student debt lingered, my car was old, my vacations had been canceled more times than I could count. They enjoyed luxury, and I paid for it in ways that no one noticed but me. That week, something in me shifted. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to texts. I sat with my own silence, feeling the discomfort of not explaining myself. I started to realize how much I had sacrificed to keep the peace, to keep the illusion that we were a family that supported each other. But it was never really support. It was dependence, and I was the one carrying the weight. The aftermath of my refusal felt like stepping into new air, thin, sharp, almost painful at first. The days immediately following the canceled payments brought a level of silence I hadn't felt in years. There were calls, then knocks at my door, but I didn't answer. I watched my phone light up with notifications, but I let them go unanswered. I realized then how much of my life I had spent in a cycle of responding, fixing, solving, putting my own needs to the side. For the first time, I did not explain myself, but the old patterns tried to pull me back. My mother left a voicemail, her voice heavy with disappointment, saying I'd hurt my father. That word, hurt, stung. For years, I had carried the responsibility for their feelings, for their comfort. Now, as I listened to her message, I felt that weight lessen. I replayed the call, not for guilt, but as a reminder of the pattern I was finally breaking. When the text began, they followed a script I had memorized long ago. Claims that I was being unfair, that I was embarrassing the family, that my actions were a form of punishment. But I was not punishing anyone. I was just done. The reality of what I'd done hit me slowly. They had been using my support, my income, as a given. It was never really acknowledged. My mother called what I did spiteful. My father accused me of playing the victim. My sister told me to grow up. They didn't see what I had been holding all these years, only the gap my absence created in their plans. The financial sacrifices, the loans, the payments, the favors, had become invisible to them, normalized by repetition. So I decided to make it visible. I sat down and made a list, not out of pettiness, but to see it for myself, to put facts above feelings. I wrote out every dollar, every payment made on their behalf. The dress for my sister, the loan to her and her husband, my father's medical bills, the groceries, the unauthorized tickets. The total felt like a betrayal, an accounting of all the times I chose their needs over my own. I sent it in an email to all of them, attaching an invoice with a request for reimbursement. I stated plainly that as of that date, I would no longer be subsidizing family expenses. If repayment didn't come, I would report the unauthorized charges to my credit provider. No more financial support, no more silent enabling. The reaction was immediate and furious. My sister accused me of being heartless. My mother called me unnecessary and cruel. My father claimed they had raised me better than that, but their anger didn't reach me the way it once did. I saw their messages for what they were, a last attempt to guilt me back into my old role, but I was done. As the days passed, I watched the group chat explode with protests, justifications, and eventually silence. My sister's accusations turned into pleas. My mother's disappointment morphed into guilt trips. My father went quiet, perhaps realizing for the first time that his authority no longer worked on me. For a moment, I questioned myself. Was I overreacting? Was I really being cruel? But the more I sat with it, the clearer it became that my only mistake was not setting these boundaries sooner. Eventually, my parents appeared at my door again. This time, both together as if a united front could break my resolve. I stood behind the door, listening to the familiar voices, but I didn't open it. I had nothing left to say. I didn't owe them access to my life, or my money, or my time. The choice was mine, and I finally took it. That night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply. I didn't check my phone for messages. I didn't worry about what came next. I started to reclaim my own peace, piece by piece, even as their disappointment echoed in the background. I began to understand that family does not entitle anyone to endless sacrifice. That realization brought not relief, but a new kind of grief, a mourning for all the years I could not get back. I learned that day that refusing to be used is not cruelty, it's survival. And for the first time, I wanted to see what my life could be without the constant drain, without being the foundation that everyone else stood on. I didn't know what came next, but I knew what I would no longer accept, and that was enough to carry me into the next chapter. The following weeks felt both empty and liberating. The space once filled with obligations, reminders, and sudden requests became quiet. The vacuum where their needs used to be was unnerving, but for the first time, I had room to hear my own thoughts. I realized how much of my identity had been built around being needed, being useful, being the one who could be relied on, even at my own expense. Now that I had taken that away, Not just from them, but from myself. I felt lost and found at the same time. In the absence of daily drama, I began to reflect on the patterns that led here. It wasn't just about money, it was about boundaries, or the lack of them. Every loan, every favor, every time I set aside my exhaustion to solve someone else's problem, it had added up, but so had my resentment. For years, I normalized the imbalance, telling myself it was what good daughters did, what good sisters did. But the longer I sat with the silence, the more I realized I had been taught to value harmony over honesty, compliance over self-respect. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message from someone outside my immediate family, Derek's ex-wife. We hadn't spoken in years. Her message was brief, but she included files, documents, a trail I couldn't ignore. I learned that Derek had been siphoning money from a family account, gambling, covering his own debts while my parents tried to keep it hidden from me. The realization cut deeper than anything before. They hadn't just relied on me, they'd allowed themselves to be complicit in using me as a cover, a solution, a safety net for someone else's mistakes. I gathered the evidence, printed it, and filed it away. I didn't feel anger so much as a hollow clarity. The choices they made, the lies they told, were all about preserving their comfort, not mine. I had believed I was a part of something, but really, I was only a part when I was useful. I reviewed every transaction, every transfer, every call for help that had always come with the same unspoken assumption. I would say yes, no matter what. Seeing it documented on paper made the truth impossible to deny. As I sat with this new knowledge, I felt a wave of grief. Not for the money, not for the lost vacations or the missed opportunities, but for the relationship I had always hoped for and never actually had. I realized I'd spent so much time believing that one day, if I just kept helping, things would balance out, that the love would become mutual, that the support would be returned. Instead, the pattern had only deepened, and my absence revealed the true nature of those ties. I started therapy. I began to see that my willingness to carry everyone's burdens had its roots far back. Habits from childhood, lessons learned in silence, the way love and obligation were always tangled together. The therapist asked me to list the things I did for myself, not for anyone else. It took longer than I care to admit. That was the real wake-up call. I realized how much of my energy, my time, my life had been handed away in small, quiet sacrifices. I didn't regret being generous. I regretted letting it be taken for granted. In that stillness, I tried new things. I cooked meals for myself. I read books that weren't about self-improvement. I took walks with no destination. Sometimes I sat and did nothing at all. The anxiety of missing out on family events faded slowly, replaced by the gentler discomfort of learning how to exist without constant emergency. I spent evenings not checking my phone, not expecting demands or guilt. I slept better, ate better, breathed easier. Every now and then, I would get a message, a letter, a call, always the same themes: guilt, confusion, the insistence that I had gone too far, that I had broken something important. But I had already learned that what I broke wasn't real. It was a version of family where my role was to absorb, to fix, to fund, to forgive, with nothing expected from anyone else. Over time, the desperation in their messages gave way to silence. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. It was fragile at first, but it grew stronger. Each day I stood my ground. I began to believe that I was worthy of being treated with respect, not as a source of rescue, but as a person with limits and needs of my own. I didn't have answers yet, but I had boundaries. I didn't have reconciliation, but I had relief. And that was more than I had hoped for at the beginning of all this. It wasn't the life I imagined for myself, but for the first time, it was mine alone. I learned to recognize the ways old habits tried to resurface. Each time I heard a voicemail or saw a new message with familiar names, my body tensed automatically, bracing for another demand, another manipulation disguised as concern. But I didn't answer, not at first, sometimes not at all. I started to see that my silence had become a language of its own, a refusal to step back into a role I never chose. Days grew into weeks. Their attempts to reach me shifted from anger to bargaining to quiet desperation. The words changed, but the expectation did not. For years, my life had run on their timelines. If someone needed money, I found a way. If someone needed a favor, I rearranged my schedule. Now I began to measure my days by what I needed instead. Therapy became more than a routine. It was the first real investment in myself. I started to see the cost of years spent neglecting my own well-being for the sake of being reliable. The smallest acts, saying no, letting calls go to voicemail, spending money on things just for me, felt like rebellion. It was in this space that my perspective started to shift. I noticed how much lighter I felt, even as the void of family traditions and rituals yawned open. Birthdays passed, holidays came and went with only polite, distant texts. The guilt that used to consume me with every absence faded, replaced by a growing sense of self-respect. I was not cold or unfeeling. I was finally learning to value my own peace over approval I could never truly earn. Then came a new wave of pressure, an unexpected consequence of my boundaries. My family, unable to reach me directly, began reaching out through others. Friends, extended relatives, even colleagues I barely knew received messages asking about me, urging them to intervene, to encourage me to return to the fold. Some expressed concern. Others tried to persuade me that family disagreements were temporary, that nothing was worth losing a family over. But none of them had seen the years of small betrayals, the way obligation had replaced genuine care. None had lived with the constant sense that their worth was measured by how much they gave. During this time, I poured myself into rebuilding a life that belonged to me. I met new people, cultivated friendships that were reciprocal, grounded in mutual support and honesty. One person in particular stood out. David worked in the hospital cafeteria, a gentle presence, unassuming, interested in the smallest details of my day. Our conversations never circled around favors or needs. For the first time, I felt what it was like to be valued simply for who I was, not what I could provide. I shared my story with David in pieces, testing the water, waiting for the moment when he might recoil or judge. He never did. He listened, asked questions, respected my boundaries without ever making me feel guilty for having them. His acceptance was so unfamiliar that I almost didn't trust it. I realized how much I had internalized the idea that love was something to be earned, through sacrifice, through suffering, through relentless service. David's quiet presence helped me see that it was possible to be close to someone without disappearing into them. Our time together became a safe space, a place where I didn't have to explain or justify my past. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by family drama, by being the rescuer or the responsible one. I could simply exist, flawed and learning, enough as I was. Amidst this growth, the echoes from my family continued. There were legal threats after I sent documentation of Derek's fraud to the authorities. There were attempts to shame me for airing family business outside the home. The narrative flipped. I was no longer just the problem, but the traitor. Yet, none of it reached me the way it once had. Their power had faded. Their ability to define me had ended the moment I put myself first. In the quiet that followed, I built new rituals. I woke up early, walked in the park, cooked meals for myself. I began to sleep without the weight of someone else's crisis hanging over me. My therapist called it recovery. I called it coming home to myself. The grief was still there, a slow, deep ache for the family I wished I'd had. But the anger subsided, replaced by acceptance. I stopped hoping for an apology, stopped expecting them to see the truth I now understood. As I moved forward, I realized that forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. It meant letting go of the wish that the past could have been different. I could honor my own pain without holding on to resentment. I could build a new life, even as I carried scars from the old one. Every day I grew stronger in my resolve. I had survived the breaking of old patterns. Now I was free to create my own. With each month that passed, the distance between my old life and my new one widened in ways I could not have predicted. The first season, after breaking ties with my family, brought challenges, but they were mine to face. No more phone calls at odd hours asking for money. No more texts demanding last-minute help. The quiet was startling, but it was honest. I discovered that peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of boundaries. Occasionally, I would see my family's names pop up on my phone or in my inbox. Letters would arrive. Sometimes apologies wrapped in guilt, sometimes veiled accusations. At first, reading their words would twist my stomach, reopening doubts. Had I done the right thing? Was I really as heartless as they claimed? But each time I returned to the facts. I reviewed the evidence of what had been taken from me, the years, the money, the trust. I reread the therapist's notes that affirmed my right to refuse exploitation, even from those who claimed to love me. Slowly, my self-doubt was replaced by a quiet conviction. There were setbacks, moments when old habits re-emerged. I sometimes caught myself feeling responsible for their problems, especially when my mother described my father's stress or my sister's struggles. The urge to step back in, to be the one who fixes everything, remained strong. But now I recognized it for what it was, a reflex, not a requirement. I was learning, day by day, to let other people own their choices, their mistakes, their suffering. It was not mine to absorb. During this time, the legal consequences for my brother-in-law's actions began to unfold. His misuse of family funds became public knowledge. My parents were forced to reckon with the fallout. I did not feel satisfaction. If anything, I felt a muted sadness for what could have been a family where honesty and mutual respect were the norm. But I did not reach out. I let the process play out without my intervention. I understood now that I could not save anyone by sacrificing myself. David remained a steady presence. Our relationship deepened, not because of drama or crisis, but because of simplicity and trust. We shared meals, laughter, and plans for the future. I allowed myself to be known in new ways, letting him see the parts of me I once tried to hide, the anxieties, the small joys, the dreams I never voiced because they had seemed selfish. For the first time, I was loved for my presence, not my usefulness. I made new routines, bike rides in the evenings, cooking new recipes on weekends, quiet mornings, reading before work. I learned to fill my own life with meaning instead of looking to others for validation. Therapy became a place not just to heal, but to grow. I explored parts of myself I'd neglected, interests I'd set aside. I gave myself permission to be happy, to be whole. There were moments when I ran into people who knew my family. Some asked about the rumors, the falling out. I did not explain. I owed no one an account of my boundaries. I simply said I was doing well and wished them the same. The less I justified myself, the freer I became. The most surprising change was how much lighter everything felt. I laughed more easily. I found joy in simple things: a favorite song, a well-cooked meal, a day spent doing nothing at all. I was no longer defined by scarcity or crisis. I was enough, just as I was. As the months slipped by, the story of my family faded into the background. They were still there, living their lives, making their choices, but I was no longer entangled in the consequences. I carried the lessons with me, not as burdens, but as reminders of what I would and would not allow again. One day, a letter came from my sister. 5 pages, handwritten, filled with explanations and regrets. She claimed to want reconciliation, but her words still circled around the same theme: my role as the fixer, the one who made things right. At the end, she insisted that we were family, that nothing could change that. I realized then that she was right in a way that brought no comfort. Family is not about blood or obligation. It is about respect, about honesty, about choice. I kept the letter, but I did not reply. I no longer needed their permission or their forgiveness. The final act of love for myself was letting go, not just of the hurt, but of the hope that they would ever be different. I moved forward, holding on to the life I had built. My days were no longer shaped by what I lacked, but by what I chose. I was still a daughter, still a sister, but those roles no longer defined my worth. I was simply myself, and for the first time, that was enough. Half a year after the last confrontation, I could finally look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back at me. Not as an extension of my family, not as the sum of what I had given away, but as someone whole, separate, and strong. The peace I found wasn't instant or easy. It was earned, day by day, in all the small choices to put my well-being first. Sometimes I missed the idea of family, the comfort of belonging somewhere unquestioned. But I understood now that real belonging isn't purchased through sacrifice or silence. Life moved on. The practical steps of closure were unglamorous. I cashed the final check they sent, not for reconciliation, but as acknowledgement that I was owed, and then donated the full amount to a scholarship fund for young women putting themselves through school alone. I didn't announce it to anyone. It was a private gesture, a closing of accounts, literal and emotional. There was no satisfaction in revenge, only the calm of no longer being owed or owing anything. I saw my family only by chance after that. Once at a cafe, I ran into my mother. She looked older, smaller somehow, as if the weight of years had pressed in on her. She tried to revive old scripts, nostalgia, appeals to family, the hope I would return. But I no longer reacted. I listened, I acknowledged her pain, but I did not take it on. The final distance wasn't physical, it was the understanding that I did not owe her or any of them my forgiveness, my trust, or my presence. My boundaries were not cruelty, they were survival. There were small acts of healing everywhere. I started new traditions, birthdays with friends who respected my limits, holidays spent hiking or cooking for myself, Sunday afternoons reading with no interruptions. I learned to enjoy solitude, to cultivate peace, to take pride in my work and my choices for their own sake. My relationship with David deepened, built on honesty and mutual care. With him, I was never reduced to my utility. He never tried to fix me, and I never felt required to rescue him. I realized that family, as I once knew it, was gone. What remained was the family I built by choice, not by obligation. The friends, the partner, the life I made for myself, all shaped by respect, not guilt. The wounds my family left did not disappear, but they no longer defined me. They became scars, evidence of survival, not of weakness. Sometimes I received updates about my old life, Derek's legal trouble, Kayla's attempts to explain things away. My parents' continued hope for my return. I did not respond. The door I closed stayed closed, and I kept the key. Each day I chose not to go back, the lighter I felt. I stopped apologizing for saying no, for protecting my time and my energy. I found strength not in confrontation, but in quiet, steady distance. I know now that closure does not come from the ones who hurt you. It comes from claiming your story, accepting what happened, and letting go of the hope that the past can be rewritten. I do not need their approval or understanding. I have made peace with the reality that some people will never see you for who you are outside of the role you played for them. My greatest freedom is living on my own terms. Today, I stand where I always wanted to be, not carrying the weight of others, but grounded in my own life. I choose who I let in, I choose what I give, I choose when to say no, and I do not feel guilty for protecting myself. I am still a daughter, still a sister, but on my terms. I am no longer their safety net. I am no longer afraid to stand alone. This is not a story of victory or bitterness, but of release. I kept the memories, the hard lessons, and the understanding that my worth is not measured by how much I bleed for others. My life is mine now. It is not perfect, but it is honest, and that is enough.